My name is Jeff Thorne, and on behalf of myself and Segra International, I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation regarding F1 hybrid seeds and the autoflower advantage. We're pleased to have a panel of experts today. Joining us is Ryan Power and Joe Ullman from Atlas Seeds, as well as Jake Brookes from Ladybug Farms, one of Atlas's Seeds key accounts and partners. I can see we've got close to 100 attendees so far online. We'd like to thank everybody for coming. Before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining today from the traditional unceded territory of the Silks Okanagan Nation. And thanks to Segra for facilitating today's chat. For those of you who aren't familiar with Segra, they are a Vancouver-based ag tech company offering plant tissue culture, plant genomics, DNA fingerprinting, pathogen detection services, as well as F1 hybrid and autoflower seeds. All of these services are to support a sustainable and the advancement of the cannabis industry. Segra's proprietary technologies empower clients to drive financial and operational performance and mitigate the risks of cultivation by starting with disease-free, true-to-type plantlets at a commercial scale. Next, I'd like to do some introductions. So I'll start with myself and then pass the mic to the other panelists. My name, as I mentioned, is Jeff Thorne, longtime cannabis grower and advocate. And I started my career in the BC wine industry before pivoting to cannabis production under the Medical Marijuana Access Program in the early 2000s. Next, I'd like to introduce Ryan Power. Ryan, would you like to give a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. Hello, I'm Ryan, and I'm the CEO of Atlas Seed, one of the founders along with Joe. And, we did organic vegetable row crops for many years. And as we began to integrate cannabis into our row cropping system, we recognized the need for the genetics that we now offer through Atlas. And I'm happy to be here and tell that story and describe the advantages and answer any questions.
Cool. And Joe, quick intro.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Joe Ullman. I am the Director of Sales and Grower Support and a co-founder with Ryan and Atlas. I too have a background in wine industry on the East Coast of the United States. I've been in the cannabis industry for over a decade, and we are excited to talk about our F1 hybrids, our autoflowers, our semi-full terms, and our full terms today for all these potential customers and people that are interested in what we do.
Very nice. And lastly, Jake, if you could give a brief introduction, please.
Yeah, I'm Jake Brookes from Ladybug Farms. We have a farm in Monterey, and we also have a floral farm up in Half Moon Bay as well. We are, traditionally flower growers. We've been growing cannabis for about 15 years, and we started our license program in Watsonville in 2018. So we've been growing cannabis for the licensed California market for just over 5 years. And Atlas have been great breeding partners to us, and we've been fortunate enough to grow out, hundreds of thousands of their seeds, and to great results, which we'll speak about today. So yeah, thanks Jeff for putting this on, and thanks to everybody here.
Awesome. That sounds really exciting. So thanks for that, everybody. Next, I've kind of prepared a few questions so we could go over some of the ins and outs of what does cannabis production from seed and autos look like. I'd like to start with Ryan, and you may have touched on this, but tell us more about Atlas Seeds and how you came to be. You mentioned the row cropping of vegetables and the transition to cannabis. So I'd love to hear more about how you identified a need and then filled that gap.
Sure. Yeah. Well, in the beginning, my partner Adam and I grew cannabis in every single way that it could possibly be grown: indoor, light depth, outdoor, field scale depths, on high tensile wire, autoflowers, full terms, late plantings, early plantings. I mean, we just did everything that we possibly could in order to learn as much as we could about it. And pretty much after the first season, we recognized that there was very little consistency or uniformity in the available genetics. So we started to take matters into our own hands to produce genetics that would fit into a field scale agronomic production model. And when we learned about autoflowers, a light bulb just went off in my head. I said, what? Because having grown vegetables for 10 years, I was imagining if you had to wait until October to harvest broccoli, for example. And with the autoflower and the ability to plant on succession, which is how we did our entire crop plan with vegetables, it allows you to space out the harvests, have multiple harvests, space out the sales process and everything associated with that, crew size, etc. So we knew we had to figure that out, and so we brought in autoflower and genetics from all over the world. We ordered from dozens of seed banks, and then again did a massive trial. And over time, by crossing certain autos with other full terms and doing trial and error, we came to what we have today, which we've improved quite a bit since then. But it was a long process, and we seeded crops more than once. We lost crops to mold by planting too late, or we brought in seeds from some seed bank in Europe and they were just all herms. I mean, we saw it all. So then we recognized that what we had was valuable, and it was fun and interesting and exciting to breed and produce seeds. So we started pulling in some support and decided, hey, let's start a seed company. And that's when we pitched the idea to Joe and our other friend Liam, and Atlas was born. And we started putting ourselves out there and gained a lot of traction because the genetics work. And it wasn't long after that we were introduced to Jake and Andy of Ladybug Farms, and our collaboration with those guys really took our efforts to the next level. It was really a synchronistic timing. So that's sort of the background.
Well, that this is like any great story of invention, is that necessity is the mother of invention, right, as they say. So it sounds like you filled a gap that you identified because of all these other production models. Now, for the audience, a lot of growers have been skeptical to plant seeds at significant scale due to challenges with stability, like you mentioned, hermaphrodites, uniformity, and the marketable quality of autoflowers. So Ryan, what are those challenges that you identified, and how has Atlas sort of overcome some of these things?
Right. Yeah, I mean that's been the case. Like I said, we bought seeds in from all over the world, and by and large, it was just a bunch of crap. So I think that the need for uniformity and consistency is what produced the crutch of cloning in cannabis for so long. And but when you're at scale and you have to use clones, you also run into a bunch of problems, which I'm sure anybody with experience there who's listening knows, whether that's pathogens or low vigor or any number of problems, and Jake can speak to that too. So yeah, we need seed lots that are consistent, uniform, and reliably feminized. So once we identified those as the required traits of agronomic cultivar, it wasn't, nothing less than that would cut it for our own production. And over the last 4 years in the licensed market in California, we also began in 2018. We've grown as much as 6 acres every season, and we've planted that entirely with our own genetics with great success, and we're still here today, which is saying something in California.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, That's a part of this is consistency to produce marketable products. So for those listening that aren't aware, what is an F1 hybrid, Ryan? Like what makes those seeds different than some of these retail packs that people are buying in the seed market?
Right. Well, I mean, cannabis is a very heterozygous crop. It's an obligate outcrosser. It has a lot of innate variability in it. And so that's just part of what the plant is. An F1 hybrid, as we're describing it here, that can mean many different things, but in the agricultural seed market, what that means is two parent lines that have been inbred and stabilized for specific traits that are desirable. And then those two lines are crossed to produce this F1 first generation hybrid that has outstanding vigor, outstanding uniformity, and a very consistent performance.
Nice.
So there's a lot that goes into it. You know, it's not just taking a clone that you got from some famous breeder and another one that you have and making a cross. There's a whole process involved with creating the parent lines, maintaining the parent lines, and then crossing them, and then trialing that cross to make sure that it performs like you think it will, and then offering it to your customers. I mean, there's a lot that goes into the production of elite genetics. And, you know, when somebody is trusting you with even 1 acre, but any scale, but call it 1 acre plus, you have to be damn sure that the seed you're offering will do what you say it does. And that's, you know, one of the things that F1 hybrids do, is that they're very uniform and very consistent.
There you go. And that's, I mean, this is, as we're talking about the evolution of the cannabis industry, this is what's needed, because scaling up clones becomes harder and harder. You know, Jake, you can speak to that. Specifically, Joe, though, you know, what are some use cases for your genetics? You guys have had planted, you know, thousands of acres over the last however many years. So when we talk about a specific cultivar, like what works in, you know, challenging microclimates? And I know a lot of our listeners, they probably are looking at a solventless extract specifically for the end use product. So what are some specific genetics that have exceptional results for high THC is another request. If you could speak to, you know, what you guys are distributing right now that has really great use cases.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, mold resistance is a really big key for most growers. They want genetics that are bred to resist mold. Our Fog Dog and our Top Gun are our two most mold resistant strains. They do very well outdoors on the East Coast of the US, where the summers are humid. There's weekly thunderstorms. They perform, we categorize those two strains as excellent in mold resistance, which is something that we roughly say would be 5% mold or less. So anybody growing in a humid environment, which is really 3/4 of our country, and probably yours as well in Canada, we'd say you got to grow Fog Dog and Top Gun. As far as washing strains, our GMO Auto and our Fruit by the Foot are both good at washing. I mean, results are around the 3% mark. We've had anywhere between 2.5% and 4%. We know that's, you know, we're striving to get above 5%. We have a couple projects that are not quite available yet that are showing good results over 5%. We're excited to bring them to market within 12 months. Let's see, as far as potency, so all of our autos are generally in the same potency bracket. They're going to hit 19 to 23% on a field scale. And when we say field scale, imagine an acre, go around and take 50 samples, homogenize those samples, run a test on it, get your number back. Because they're from seed, you're gonna see a curve, right? They're not the distribution of potency is not, they're not clones, they're from seeds. So our goal in breeding is always to push that standard deviation north, essentially, to make stuff more potent. When we started, we were in the low teens, and now we're in the high teens into the low 20s. We consistently hit above 20 in hot environments, hot days. Coastal growing in cooler climates where the daytime temps, when I say hot, I mean over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Nighttime temps also matter quite a bit. The warmer the nighttime temps, we've seen higher potencies. Where when you're growing coastal and it's a little cooler, you'll see in that 16 to 19%. Same genetics, same lots, just environment matters. But my favorite ones, and our growers' favorite ones for trimmed flower, would be our grease gun and our fruit by the foot. Those two are fantastic, dense flower structures that we monetize ourselves as well as other growers in the trim flower market, not just the extraction market.
Right on. And you mentioned at a field scale. So when growers are selecting tops to trim for the flower market, you see an even higher bump in potency, if I'm not correct. And Ryan, like, what is your experience at your farm? Like with respect to selection for potency, it's on every consumer's mind because that's how our distribution channels have been established to date, is about regarding potency. So what is some of the other data points that you've collected?
Yeah, it's a hot topic. There's a lot. I think it was that High Times, Joe? Somebody just released a whole new categorization of cannabis types based on the terpene profile, which is in fact more important than potency.
Emerald Cup.
Emerald Cup. Okay, that's right. The hyper fixation on numbers is endemic in a culture that regularly confuses measurement for reality. THC is a single cannabinoid. There's over 50 that we know about and possibly more. It really just doesn't even tell half the story. And quite honestly, it's really annoying fixation that everybody in the licensement has to deal with. So, we've, as you can probably tell from the stories I've told, we try literally everything we can. And I would tell somebody out there who has a plant growing right now in the tent or garage to take potency samples from 2 different branches on the same plant and see if the potency is the same. Go into a field of clones and take 50 samples, and you're going to just get different potencies and terpenes on a single plant. So it's not, you can't even rely on the laboratory science anyways. I mean, anybody in any LP has done this at some point, where you send in 2 identical samples and you send them to the same lab, but you just change the name, and guess what? They're identical. They came from the same nug. You get a different potency. Okay, all of that said, we still breed for a higher potency by lowering the standard deviation and only selecting the plants with the highest potency to push the breeding program forward.
And that's part of the maintenance of your parental lines, is by making these selections based on the, what you're trying to breed or select for. So this is all part of the ongoing work that never really ends, right? Like, it's not like a singularity where this is an ongoing process. So that's fascinating. So, I mean, Jake, you're large scale commercial grower. You've grown, it sounds like, a number of different crop types. So I was hoping you could dive into some of the advantages of the crop planning that comes along with autoflowers. I come from an agricultural background with viticulture. We had different varieties we were growing. So we had, staggered harvests based on the wine type that we were growing. But from a cannabis perspective, it all is, we love the term Croptober. Our community celebrates that. You get the taco truck out or whatever, you get everybody together, and it's a big event, but often the infrastructure doesn't support the scale for acreages, right? So from a crop planning perspective, what is the advantage to autos?
For us in terms of crop planning, I look at everything from the lens of a greenhouse grower, and lenses of a greenhouse grower are, somewhat different from outdoor production, but in the same sense, we're all trying to achieve the same goal. We're all trying to get the best expression from a plant. So for us, we operate a traditional greenhouse nursery. We'll have, about 20% of our total greenhouse space as nursery. So, autoflowering genetics for us, we've tried them for, 5+ years in the very beginning, like Ryan mentioned, that they're extremely awful. That's probably the only way to that's probably the only way to capture them. They're just terrible. Since meeting with Atlas and really helping and collaborating with them to develop these genetics, it's given us the ability to see a different strain represented 10 times to 12 times a year in a greenhouse, which is very important. I cannot understate yet that a lot of people growing in greenhouses or growing outdoors don't yet realize how powerful it is to be able to turn the crop multiple times, to reduce your economics, and to really just deliver a better quality product for a better quality price point. So for us, we've grown 3 acres of greenhouse canopy, which is about 35 acres a year of auto canopy for the last 2 years now, and it's enabled us to really look at crop planning not just for tops or for smokable flower, but really to look at a wholesale ingredient category of, these specific genetics are very good for THCA diamond production. These genetics are very good for live rosin production. These genetics are very good for live resin, fresh rosin, butane production. So, by having this arsenal of autoflowering genetics that you can plant and you can turn very, very quickly, it gives you the ability to play in multiple different ingredient categories. And the fact that you can turn the crop multiple times in a year, much more so than you could do with a clonal crop, through relatively low investment, means that you can try a number of different genetics and figure out what works well for your market. And the fact that this crop and these genetics can be turned so quickly means that you have so many more chances to iterate the breeding of them. So these genetics now, in 1 year, just like Joe said, will be in a completely different phase than they are now. It's pretty exciting, really, because these genetics are advancing so quickly, especially compared to regular genetics that we've been used to from clone.
So that's fascinating, because everybody has tunnel vision on these clonal elite propagation, but not realizing there's this whole other world of crop production out there. All these other crop types that we consume every single day, they're all grown from seed, because that's what's economically viable at, we'll call it industrial scale at this point. And I agree, old autos sucked. They didn't taste good. Let's talk about end user product. We're not fully commoditized where buyers are just looking at numbers on a spreadsheet. This is a consumer packaged good and a consumer experience. So when you talk about how old autoflowers that you tried previously were not of a marketable quality, what did you see as a jump in quality, Jake? Like when you moved over to the Atlas products?
We'll just touching on more to what Ryan said and what Joe said, is really autoflowers in a greenhouse. Like you cannot tell the difference between autoflower and regular season genetics. I think it's almost like a sort of bad that we categorize them that way. Really, it's almost like there's different plant morphologies, and some of them need different infrastructure. Again, for us in a greenhouse, all of our greenhouses are predominantly outfitted with blackout curtains, but some of them don't. But you cannot tell in February what genetics are autoflower or what genetics have had 12 hours of life. Because if you keep stable heat throughout the nighttime, you're going to get results that is actually better than a lot of a clonal production. It really depends on the health of your clones, where they are. The battle that we were trying to make, for years was that, we're doing, 15 to 25 to 30,000 plants per week. Now, when you're trying to maintain 30 to 32 different clonal varieties, you're essentially battling against a depreciating curve. You're always trying to fight for the health of the plant, and you're taking in genetic material from a number of sources that is, 90% of the time not healthy. From seeds and from auto seeds, it just gives you so much more flexibility to play around and to give your customers and to give your end consumer something to trial that they often like. And And, just as Ryan said, once the terpene diversity is really fully fledged throughout autoflowers, the consumer will have a better experience because it will be, the same, if not better, from a, experienced product perspective, but it will be better from an economic perspective. So there's a lot of benefits in my mind, and it's something that we will, will continue in a very big way.
Right on. So, Joe, maybe you can touch on this. We keep discussing about how autos are fast and sub-autos are fast. What makes them fast? Why are they fast compared to photoperiod cultivar?
Well, simply put, we select for that in our parental lines. But to go back before that, maybe autoflowers essentially have that internal clock. They don't flower based on light cycle. They flower based on an internal clock inside. Most of our genetics are between 65 and 80 days from sowing to harvest. The advantage to that would be pulling in crops in midsummer in a lot of the geographical areas in Southern Cal or in California where Jake is. He can go all year round because he has more light. But the ability to bring fresh product in a more traditional sense of like growing season from, let's say, May to October, to be able to bring fresh flower to market in early July or even late June is hugely advantageous to the price point of what you're getting, and the customer likes it even better because it's fresh. But yeah, so that's a huge advantage to a business, to be able to have a cash flow in the middle of the season, spread out their post-harvest infrastructure, labor, drying capacity, and come to market sooner. Now, not just autos, we've been saying this term semi-full terms, and our semi-full terms are first generation auto photoperiod crosses. So one copy of the autoflower gene is a semi-full term. It's photoperiod in every sense of the word that you think of. You can clone it. It flowers based on light cycle. But because it has one copy of the autoflower gene, when it's sown in mid-May, or if anybody's from the Southern Hemisphere, would be if it's sown in mid-November, before mid-November, you're going to get a 2 to 4 week sooner harvest compared to its photoperiod clonal mother or one of its parents. And that's because that one copy of the autoflower gene triggers it into flowering sooner, and therefore it finishes sooner. And that means you have September harvests in the Northern Hemisphere and March harvests in the Southern Hemisphere, which generally means you're bringing it in when there's greater light and before rain. Rains will come, fall rains will come. So that speaks to the autos as well when we're growing outdoors, is let's generate biomass when the climate is good, when the days are long, the air is dry, when, working outside is pleasant as well. Bringing in these big crops in the fall has often been a large challenge. So, maybe Ryan, you can speak to that. The infrastructure required and the team management required of a full-term production model versus an autoflower production model, it's almost two different businesses. And can you speak to that and how you guys have developed best practices for successive planting?
Sure. Although I will say the best model I've ever seen in the world for successive planting and harvest model is that Ladybug farm.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Yeah, that is greenhouse. So Jay can talk about that, but in the outdoor, yeah, so we plant as early as we can. Sometimes that's April. More often it's May, depends on spring rain. And then we get a harvest in June or July, after which time we plant, again, a semi-full term and full term crop. And, on an outdoor license, so not mixed light license, which costs more, but on an outdoor license, that allows us to get 2 harvests in the same acre, which a pretty big deal. But as anyone who grows cannabis knows, the main push is always at harvest, and keeping your crew busy, a crew that's big enough to complete a harvest busy throughout the year, is actually not easy. And it also isn't easy to bring in temp harvest crews, depending on where you are. So spreading out that scope of work for your crew is also a huge advantage to autoflowers. But I mean, getting 2 harvests is also a huge advantage, and sometimes 3. I mean, once we planted a late autoflower crop direct sow, and I think we had some ground available, and I believe we planted it in August, September.
It was a November harvest.
No, it was a harvest around Thanksgiving. So I think we planted in September. Like, whatever, let's see what happens. And it absolutely crushed. The weather cooperated. But where the staggering of the infrastructure really matters for an outdoor grower is that fall. And so choosing varieties that finish on different timelines becomes increasingly important, whether or not you're using semi-full terms. In the full term category, you have anywhere from 6 to 11 weekers. And so all that goes into a well thought out crop plan.
Very good. I mean, that's something that, Joe, you as the head of grower support, you work with customers to help develop. How do we best optimize your infrastructure, your team? Jake, Ryan mentioned that you're the expert in crop planning when it comes to, successive planting. What have the challenges been for you guys over at Ladybug when it comes to labor and just, the resources required to get a crop in and through process?
Yeah, I mean, the labor's obviously really, outside of taxes and regulatory costs in California, labor is probably the biggest consideration. So, I'm a big proponent of the seed model over clone for this exact fact. We grow in 1 to 2 gallon containers. So simple, easy units of 1. And at peak, our peak production has been 1.4 million plants a year. Everything is done on a specific weekly cycle. Through seed, we can use automation, and we can really actually dial in how many touch points we need per plant to get it into nursery. We can very easily forecast how long it's going to be into nursery, and then we know exactly how much labor to plan because, hey, we've got 8,000 to 10,000 plants that are going to be ready Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's very easy to forecast because we're working in simple units. In a greenhouse, we have that luxury. And that's the biggest consideration you're going to need to make. And really, for greenhouse growers with autos, you're going to want to work on the metric. It's a tremendously quick crop. We're seeing the crop finish from direct sow into soil to harvest in under 8 weeks, which is, again, an extremely powerful tool to be able to yield in a greenhouse, especially if you're working with like a fresh frozen model. I think autos from greenhouses are a pretty perfect fresh frozen crop. Ryan touched on it a little bit earlier and Joe also about about how important it is to bring fresh crops to market and to bring those crops to market when they are at their highest value. And even for the fresh frozen industry at the minute, having to invest in tremendous amounts of infrastructure from September to December to keep a crop frozen throughout the rest of the year to sell it out, that is now becoming almost less viable from an economic perspective because you've got so much cost to do that. Having a crop that comes in every week or every month and is continuously fresh, you can match that demand to where the market is. In California, we've seen a tremendously difficult time period over the last year. So demand planning and being able to react very quickly. Hey, I'm going to pull back on planting, so in 8 weeks, I don't need the demand. Or hey, you know what? I've got a lot of demand that I'm forecasting and I'm pre-booking in 10 weeks' time. I need to be planting very heavily now. And for that, it makes navigating a challenging market very, 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 very beneficial. You can scale up and down very easily.
Especially the scale up. We've all done clonal propagation, and if you want to scale a variety up, that takes time. Whereas seeds in a small silo, you can scale up that planting not instantly, but with the help of automation, you can through your nursery get a single variety up and running at a large scale very, very rapidly because seeds are shelf stable, they're in the bank, right? So it's a more agronomic approach to cannabis production for sure. And whether outdoor or greenhouse, it doesn't matter. You smaller drying room, less. Another note I've gotten from a lot of growers with these seeds is we don't have as large of a crew maintaining the crop in the field. We don't have as much trellising. We don't have as much. It's a better structure. It's more conducive to outdoor and large scale growth than these photo periods, which do well indoors and okay in a greenhouse. They're not all appropriate for outdoor production. And growers are finding this out by trial and error. Whereas Ryan mentioned, Atlas does a ton of trials with these seeds. They don't just release, new genetics that haven't been tested at scale to make sure that the growers have success. It's a huge part of being able to stand behind your products is actually trialing them and not just dropping them to the market as soon as they're potentially available. So, with all that said, Ryan, back to you. We've talked about where we started here with the autoflowers and these new hybrids and kind of where we are. Where's this going? What innovation is Atlas looking at as far as your R&D initiatives? Joe mentioned on a few hash washing projects, but where do you see the future of the Atlas seed portfolio?
Well, to get a good autoflower, you need to have a good photo period. So, we are actively developing and have recently acquired a whole host of just excellent photo period stabilized parent lines. And then we learned somewhere along the way a novel technique of bottlenecking for desirable traits as you take those generations necessary to take a photo period to autoflower, so that where we're starting with before we build up production stock and commercially available seed, where we're starting with is already much better, much more uniform and more consistent. So you're going to keep seeing gains in all the categories we've already highlighted today. But other than that, we want to have varieties suitable for a host of markets. And, Joe spoke about that, Jake spoke about that. So we're looking for unique terpenes. We're looking for the entourage effect when we trial our own genetics, or our friends do, or with our friends. And because really, at the end of the day, it's what it all comes down to, right? Is a good smoke or a great experience. And there's medicinal value too. So we're looking at, we'll have a 1-to-1 autoflower available, 1-to-1 CBD THC. And yeah, more gains in all the categories we've mentioned, whole new terpenes, and some more medicinally focused lines coming up. Yeah,
I'm glad that you highlighted the consumer quality and the effect, because unfortunately a lot of industrial growers to date in the first years of legalization, particularly in Canada, it was just about scale and it wasn't necessarily about quality, and that scale turned into inventory, and that inventory did not serve any of the stakeholders. So making sure that we can see throughput into the commercial market and sales, I think it benefits everybody on the phone here. So yeah, it's noted that this is smokable flower from the field, and that's why I was really fascinated with these new elite genetics. Is and Joe, I'd love for you to touch on this. Is outdoor grown previously had really been only extraction grade, but now with this generative biomass during the height of the summer, we're really seeing smokable flower out of the fields. So what has your experience been as far as like what the consumers are seeing, and how is what the improvements you've made through selective breeding? What are you seeing as consumer quality improvements and recently and in the near future?
That's a good question. Before I answer that, I just want to go back to highlight one thing that Ryan's left out about what's coming down the pike, and that is longer flowering autoflowers. We have acquired some of these genetics from a a long-time breeder that we've had a good relationship with, and we're excited to incorporate his work, where we have always been selecting for shorter flowering periods. He was based in Canada, up in Edmonton, and he was consistently selecting for longer autos. So where ours are 65 to, or we'll say 60 to 80 days, 65 to 80 days, he was going for 100 days to 120 days. And that was because he was getting essentially a crop coming in late August, early September, and it was bigger than an autoflower that was only going 65, 70, 75 days. So that's exciting for climates that are a little bit, let's say in Canada outdoors, it's a real challenge to try to pull 2 turns in the ground without a greenhouse. So yeah, there's that. To kind of now jump over to your question about what's the advantage to growing autos or like in the marketplace in that summer, those summer months. And I can really speak from experience that growing autoflowers, getting in the ground in late May, early June, having them harvested mid-July and ready for sale end of July, beginning of August, those fresh flowers are, and let's just say traditionally, in the traditional markets, that tends to be the lowest point in the cycle of like available fresh flower, right? Because it's people are selling through last year's outdoor harvest, which was like 10 and 11 months ago. When you bring autoflowers to market that are fresh and you price them the same as last year's outdoors, every time buyers choose the fresh flower, every single time. And I've seen that borne out the last 5 years. And that's because people want fresh stuff. They prioritize that smells fresh, that's greener, it's more vibrant. So I think that speaks for itself. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, from a distribution standpoint, we're having to treat this like red wine, where it sits in a warehouse, a dusty old warehouse before it gets drawn down, but we should be treated more like draft beer, served fresh, kept in the cold chain. And autos are an advantage because you can get the product to market faster, and that is fresh, and that goes for the fresh flower and the dry flower product. So, yeah, I agree. I like my cannabis fresh.
Yeah,
I think most people do. So, Jake, we keep talking about fast. Like fast, and I guess from a greenhouse culture perspective, what are some of the tricks and tips that you guys use to keep the crop on a fast schedule? Outdoor growers don't have as much control. We do the successive planting, so we have a smaller drying room, smaller team. But in the greenhouse culture, what are some of the the tricks from a mechanical or a technical perspective that you guys do to keep the crops turning over so fast?
Yeah, I think it's nice to have genetics that are quick, and it's also nice, Joe touched on an excellent point. It's nice to have genetics that can take a little bit longer. Because there's certain times throughout the year where labor is less available, or you want to push out genetics a little bit longer because you may not have the demand, or you're waiting for a specific style demand. To keep things and to keep crops turnover in a greenhouse, it's about having really good pipelines to the market and really understanding your customers, understanding what they want, and then you doing the heavy lifting to sort of pair that for them. For us, it's really investing in the necessary infrastructure in the nursery. For autos, because it's such a quick crop, you can really, that is where you have to focus all of your emphasis. It's the right amount of heat, the right amount of light. We will still light the crops in nursery, funnily enough, and we're finding that we just get bigger yields, and it sort of even keeps the crop a little bit quicker. So we'll light them just like our regular clonal or natural season seed production, and we find we get better stretch, we get bigger yields even from a 1 gallon pot, and it cuts down nursery time to sort of three weeks. That then gives us more time to spend, and we can push the plants a little bit more in flower. And then it'll really depend to whether it's going to fresh frozen or whether it's going to smokable flower for pre-rolls, for pre-ground. They're the main considerations. And, so much of our demand production goes into, pre-ground and pre-roll material. Really, then you're looking for, unique terpene profiles, genetics that have sort of good potency and have good flavor profile and effect profile. And I just continue to, I can't underestimate the fact that within, over the next 2 to 3 years here, I don't think customers and consumers will, I don't think be able to tell the difference is the right word. I think that, it'll just start to dissolve in their mindset of like, why are auto flowering genetics stigmatized as opposed to natural season genetics? If you're looking at it from a grower's or from an agronomist perspective, you just want the best plant in your production and you want to be able to deliver the best quality product. Whether that is from a clone, whether that is from a natural season seed or an auto seed, I'm indifferent. I just want to deliver, a good product to our customers. So it's a great tool in your arsenal. And I think people will find once they allocate more of their production to auto flowering seeds, that they will just naturally start allocating more of their production to them.
As someone who used to sell outdoors greenhouse depths and greenhouse depths as indoor, I can already say that veil has started to fall, and these delineations between the different genetic types is less important. These value ounces and whatnot that we see in the marketplace, or the pre-ground or pre-rolls for that matter, the ingredients that go into those are becoming less and less categorized and is more and more naturalized as a floriculture crop. So I think we have more work to do, but it's definitely the direction this is all going. I think at this point, because we're coming up on the hour, let's hit the Q&A. We have a few questions here we'll get into. One of them is specifically about greenhouse culture for Jake. So a listener is asking, do those autos in the greenhouses stay in 1 gallon pots for their entire life?
Yes. Yeah, the whole transplanting is extraordinarily overrated. I can't stress enough. We're trying to deliver a good product at an extraordinarily competitive price point to a consumer. In cannabis, you've got this sort of, 1,000-pound monster in the corner of the room, which is, a marketplace and economy that runs right beside us that has half of the production expenses in taxes, regulation, labor, etc. So, our goal as operators and licensed producers is to deliver a quality product to consumers. So you've got to cut down on your touch points, and you've got to cut down on your expenses. And direct sowing into your final home container can be extraordinarily automated, and there are already, you don't have to find new cannabis automation to do that. So feeders, conveyor belts, spacers, it's all readily available. And in this marketplace where prices are sort of becoming a commodity, you need to be wary of where your economics are going and where your cost is allocated.
Touch is cost, always. That's movement and touch are costs in agriculture. So here's a question for Joe. It says, can you discuss best practices for acclimation or transplanting into the field?
Sure. The biggest downfall is not having enough moisture in your bed prior to transplanting. You start your seeds, you want to use a floating media. That's essentially an LE pot or a grow coon or a jiffy plug, something that you can pop out of its cell 8 to 12 days after sowing. That's the sweet spot. They're a little quicker with LE pots, a couple days longer with grow coons, what we found. But you don't want to wait longer than 18 days. We found that that's the maximum level. Basically between day 12 and day 18 from sowing, you start to see a reduction in size of the final plant because they don't like to get root bound. So let's say you've hit it perfectly. You've sown the right amount of seed that you can each day that you can then transplant into your field. You don't want to sow too much. And you then turn your prior to transplanting, about 2 days before, you turn your irrigation on in your beds. and you make sure that there's good moisture in there. It's not a muddy mess. It's not sloppy because you're gonna have to work in there, but there's moisture already there. And then you go through with your water wheel transplanter or by hand, depending on what size you are, and you transplant the plants in, you turn the irrigation on as well. And you cover them up and you make sure that, then they're good. The biggest downfall is people waiting to turn their irrigation on at the day of transplanting, and they're putting a plug in that's moist because, they came from the prop house, they're at the turn row, they've watered them in, but then they're going into a dry bed. And we all know transplanting, if you're not as experienced, you don't have an experienced team, it takes longer than it should. The day stretches on. Now you're in the middle of the day, it's hot out, you're still trying to push through, and the plants don't die, but they get stressed enough that they trigger. And then a week later, you start to notice flowers. You're going to end up with a 6-inch high plant that just blows your yield metrics out of the water. Nobody's happy. So the key is making sure you have adequate moisture in that bed prior to transplanting. I
think I've heard you say that 100 times.
And I will say it 100 more, and I'm happy to say that to anybody that's growing our genetics. I will be happy to talk with you to make sure you have the success and you have all the tools you need. You can reach out anytime. Your success is our success.
That's a really good point. It's mutual success. So we have another question regarding transplanting here. Have you tried planting these seeds with a seed drill, like a grain? That would be a direct sow tool.
Yeah, we have, and it's been touched on earlier in this. Direct sowing is better, right? However, in the field, direct sowing with our lots that germinate above 90%, we don't release anything up over that. Most of them are over 94% to 99%. We still only see, at best, a 60% emergence rate in native soil. And that's because native soil is different than a peat plug, and the cannabis seed is not the strongest emerger out of soil. So what do? We throw double the seed at the acre, right? Of course, because we have a lot of seed to do that. Why do we do that? Well, because overall that direct sown plant ends up being 20 to 25% bigger than a transplanted autoflower. However, we don't commercially recommend direct sowing simply because the cost, right? And people would have to buy 2x or even 2.5x their seed. However, internally in our breeding program, we are working at improving that. And we have some, we've been at it for over a year now to improve the emergence rate out of native soil, because we really do feel like Jake said, transplanting is overrated. The future of this is direct sow.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think we can all agree. Yeah. So here's another one regarding, the auto specifically and nursery work. So how cold tolerant are the autos for Northern California, and can they resist frost, or will they be stressed out? Do the autos need supplemental lighting when emerging from starting material before being planted in the field? It's a two-part question, I guess, cold tolerance and supplemental lights in the nursery.
We recommend the soil to be 60 degrees or above to have best performance, and that's sustained 60 degrees before transplanting out. They can definitely tolerate cold temperatures, like air temperatures. There's quite a few examples of transplanting out in early spring and then having high 30s or low 40 weather events come through in that first week of transplanting. No early trigger, no problem. Plants don't grow very much, but they just kind of hang and wait until the sun comes out. And as far as on the back end with frost at the end of the cycle, end of the season, all of our autos can truck through multiple light frost and keep going. And light frost would be in that 30 to 31, 32 degrees. Obviously, harder killing frosts, take their toll, and then the season's over.
Gotcha. And as far as, Jake, you want to take this one, supplemental light in your nursery? I assume you guys are running quite a bit of light to keep things performing fast.
Yeah, I mean, we've done trials with a number of different, we do trials throughout the year with, no supplemental lighting for autos. We have the luxury of being able to do it. So we will typically light through simple LEDs, keep them pot to pot. And when the plants are at about 18 to 20 inches, we'll then move them out to the greenhouse, give them more space, give them about 1.5 square foot per plant, and that's when they'll finish out the flowering cycle for the last sort of 4 to 5 weeks. And you're just going to get a better yield. You're going to get a better production per square foot if you're operating a greenhouse. But you can do it a number of different ways. If you don't have the infrastructure and you don't have the power, and you're doing 50 acres out in a great climate, you've got flexibility with this crop, but you don't with this. But I would always advise, if you're in a greenhouse setting and you're doing it in containers, allocate a certain portion of your infrastructure to lighting it, keeping it pot to pot, and then the wider scale flowering can be lower tech and could be lower infrastructure.
Yeah, great. And here's another note: the propagation, planting, and transplanting guides are all available on the Atlas Seed website. So any other questions that might come up, this is when you work with Atlas, and Segra, they provide. It's a relationship, not just a transaction. That might seem cliche, but it's really important that some of these best practices are adhered to, because we want the seeds to perform in the field and growers to be successful. Otherwise, it's just it's not benefiting anyone, right? So we are kind of coming up on the hour here. I think we should wrap it up. Everybody's got to get back to their greenhouses or their nurseries. So I want to thank all the panelists. Obviously, Jake, Joe, Ryan. You guys are obviously experts in this, and you're very passionate about what you do. That comes across on the phone here. I'd like to thank everybody who attended as well. This was really interesting sharing this with you all. If you have any questions, or if anything comes up that wasn't addressed here, you can reach out to me. I'm Jeff.T at Segra-international.com, or just info@Segra. Drop us a line. The full catalog is available on the Segra website as well. And so if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and we can follow up. Again, thank you to our panelists and our guests. So we'll wrap it up there, and have a great day. This session, I guess we're going to conclude. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jeff.
Hey, ciao.